Christopher Kit Carson is one of the most fascinating, complex, and controversial figures of the Western frontier. His name became legendary in the 1800s due to his adventures, bravery, and key role in the expansion of the American West. He was a frontiersman, trapper, scout, soldier, and Indian agent. But his story is also one of complexity, involving war, diplomacy, and deep cultural conflict. He played a key role in westward expansion, and while many praised his bravery, his legacy also includes controversy. We'll learn more about the man behind the myth and what his life reveals about the era of manifest destiny and Native American displacement in this edition of Artifact of the Week. Kit Carson was born in 1809 in Kentucky, but he grew up in Boone's Lick, Missouri, near the home of William Bucknell, who would go on to start the Santa Fe Trail. At the young age of 16, he ran away from home and joined a merchant caravan headed to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he began to learn to speak Spanish. In New Mexico, he found his calling as a fur trapper and frontiersman, relocating to Taos. Like many trappers and mountain men of his time, Carson lived and worked closely with Native American tribes, acquiring many skills from them and adopting a way of thinking of the world around him that mirrored theirs. Carson mastered the universal sign language used by several Western tribes and acquired a working knowledge of more than 6 Native American tongues. His deep knowledge of the land and people made him a key figure in the American frontier. At the age of 25, Carson married an Arapaho woman named Singing Grass. Together they had 2 daughters, one of whom died in early childhood. In 1839, while giving birth to their second daughter, Singing Grass died. In 1841, Carson married his second wife, Making Out Road, of the Cheyenne tribe. This marriage only lasted about 14 months, ending in divorce. In April 1842, Carson went back to his childhood home in Missouri to put his daughter Adeline in the care of relatives. On his return trip to Taos in May of 1842, he met a young Army officer, John C. Fremont. Fremont was assembling a government-sponsored expedition to map the West and hired Carson to be his guide. In early June, the expedition set out from St. Louis with a party of 25 men. Their goal was to map the first leg of an overland route to the Pacific that had been discovered at least 30 years earlier, but remained unused by anyone but fur trappers and Indians. This route would soon be called the Oregon Trail. While Carson probably did not realize it, he had signed on to help advance what could be the most ambitious political enterprise of the 19th century, a project that would become known as Manifest Destiny. During that first summer, Fremont's party covered some 1,200 miles, moving along the Platte and North Platte rivers through present-day Kansas and Nebraska, ending up in South Pass in Wyoming. The next summer, they picked up the route at South Pass, following the trail toward the Pacific. They crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains during the winter, went south through California and crossed the Mojave Desert before cutting back across the southern Rocky Mountains. In all, they surveyed and mapped approximately 5,000 miles. Carson's survival skills, navigation expertise, and calm under pressure demeanor helped these expeditions succeed. As part of his official duties, Fremont wrote and submitted ongoing expedition reports. In August of 1844, these reports were bound into a single volume and published in Washington, D.C. While these reports were intended to be official documentation of the expedition's findings, Fremont included glowing statements about Carson and his exploits, turning them more into a grand adventure tale. The book became a bestseller in its day and was used as a handbook by hundreds of thousands of people going west. This turned Carson into a national celebrity despite his dislike for fame or publicity. Following the second Fremont expedition, Carson returned to Taos in July 1844 to settle down with his third wife, Josefa Jaramillo, a member of a prominent Taos family. They were actually married in February 1843 after Carson converted to Catholicism. Soon after their wedding, Carson departed for the second Fremont trip, leaving Josefa and his daughter behind for the next 13 months. Following his return, Carson focused on his small family and life as a rancher and merchant. That was until duty called again. In 1845, Carson guided Fremont on his third expedition. The trip started at Westport Landing, Missouri, crossing the Rockies, passing the Great Salt Lake and down the Humboldt River to the Sierra Nevada of California and Oregon. Once in California, Fremont started to rouse the American settlers into a patriotic fervor. The Mexican general at Monterey ordered Fremont and his soldiers to leave. In defiance, Fremont erected a makeshift fort and raised a U.S. flag. Soon, a messenger from Washington caught up with Fremont's party and made it clear that President Polk wanted California as part of the United States. In June 1846, Fremont and Carson participated in the Bear Flag Revolt. A California uprising against Mexico started after Mexico ordered all Americans to leave California. American settlers in California wanted to be free of the Mexican government and declared California an independent republic. It was the beginning of the Mexican-American War. From 1846 to 1848, Carson served as a courier, traveling 3 times from California to the east and back. On his first trip, he encountered General Stephen W. Kearny, who ordered him to pass along his dispatches and guide his troops from New Mexico to San Diego, California. On December 8th, about 25 miles from their final destination, Mexican soldiers attacked Kearny's troops. Outnumbered, Kearny ordered his men to take cover on a small hill. He then dispatched Carson and 2 others to bring reinforcements from San Diego. Walking barefoot through the desert, Carson returned 2 days later with 200 dragoons and drove the Mexican soldiers away. By the late 1840s, in large part thanks to the writings of Fremont, Carson had become a national obsession. It all started with stories told in taverns and names on a map. Then in 1849 came a new genre of adventure stories featuring Carson as a caricature of himself, a giant of a man who referred to Indians as redskins, critters, and varmints, and cheerfully slaughtered them by the dozens. The genre became popular almost overnight. Over the years, some 70 books would be written. They were priced at 25 cents or less, and they would seal Carson's reputation as a larger-than-life frontiersman whose exploits helped clear the way for civilization. After the Mexican-American War, Carson returned to Taos to again transition into a career as a businessman and rancher. He also brought his daughter back from Missouri to join him and his wife. In early 1849, Carson's longtime friend Lucien Maxwell invited him to help develop and settle an area called Rayado. Maxwell and Carson met and became friends during the first Fremont expedition, where Carson served as the guide and Maxwell as a hunter. In April, Maxwell and Carson started their settlement at Rayado. Both began to build adobe homes at Rayado. Maxwell's house became part of a large enclosed compound with 20 rooms and a courtyard around an acre in size. While Maxwell used many of the local adobe building techniques, he did incorporate several Eastern luxuries such as decorative beams, paned glass windows that faced into the courtyard, panel doors, and a pitched roof over his family's wing of the compound. Carson's home was smaller and more consistent with the utilitarian New Mexico-style buildings of the time, having a flat roof, dirt floor, and beehive corner fireplaces. By summer, 40 or 50 men were busy harvesting timber from the nearby mountains and milling it into lumber. Others were occupied mowing the tall grass sold to the government as feed. Increasing numbers of sheep, horses, mules, and cattle grazed on the surrounding pastures and meadows. 4 farmers arrived that second spring to begin farming operations and digging irrigation ditches to carry water into their fields. 15 more families joined them the next season. Immediately, Rayado became an important stop on the mountain branch of the Santa Fe Trail, providing security, supplies, feed for livestock, and easy access to the Taos cutoff up Morris Creek. Despite their success, being the only substantial settlement between Bent's Fort and Las Vegas had challenges. Men at the settlement, including Carson, were often asked to help travelers and merchants in trouble along the trail. As the settlement grew, so did the threat from the surrounding native tribes. By the spring of 1850, several raids had taken place at and around the Rayado settlement. In May, a detachment of U.S. First Dragoons arrived to help protect both the settlement and the travelers on the mountain branch of the Santa Fe Trail. In the summer of 1850, Carson sold a herd of horses to the military at Fort Laramie in Wyoming. In 1851, he led a trading expedition to Missouri back and forth along the Santa Fe Trail, and in 1852, he and a few of the veteran trappers made a looping trapping expedition through Colorado and Wyoming. In mid-1853, Carson purchased 6,500 head of sheep, which he drove to California. Maxwell followed close behind with a second herd. The pair met in San Francisco, returning to New Mexico by Christmas 1853. By 1854, the small Rayado settlement had become quite successful, largely due to the perseverance of the early settlers and the support of the U.S. military. Small numbers of settlers and farmers continued to arrive, and in January 1854, Carson sold his interest in Rayado and his family returned to Taos, where he was appointed U.S. Indian Agent for New Mexico, one of the first federal Indian agents in the far west. In this position, he was responsible for the Maoshi Ute people, Jicarilla Apache, and the Taos Pueblo in northern New Mexico territory, which then included southwest Colorado. He was respected by many Native American leaders and advocated for peaceful coexistence and fair treatment of Native American tribes. Carson remained in this position until April 1861 when the Civil War began, and he was called to service as the lieutenant colonel of the 1st New Mexico Volunteer Infantry. Initially, Carson worked to organize the 1,000 men, most of whom were from prominent Hispanic families while stationed at Fort Union. On September 21st, the regiment's colonel resigned and Carson assumed command of the regiment as a full colonel. Following the capture of southern New Mexico by Confederate forces, Carson and his regiment were deployed in defensive and blocking positions near Fort Craig, south of Albuquerque, and participated in the Battle of Valverde in February 1862. After the Battle of Glorieta Pass in March of 1862, his troops remained as part of the garrison forces at Fort Craig through the summer. In the fall of that year, the new military commander of the territory, Brigadier General James Carleton, planned the most comprehensive and most ruthless campaign ever to have been carried out in the West to solve what he considered to be the problem of the troublemaking Indians. His instrument to carry out his plan would be Carson and his soldiers. In October 1862, Carleton ordered Carson and 5 companies of his regiment to occupy and rebuild Fort Stanton about 80 miles from Fort Craig. Carleton also gave Carson special confidential orders on October 12th, which in part read, "All Indian men of that tribe," meaning the Mescalero Apache, "are to be killed whenever and wherever you find them. The women and children will not be harmed, but you will take them prisoner and feed them at Fort Stanton." Now, before Carson arrived at Fort Stanton, another officer deceived and then killed or wounded more than 30 Mescalero Apache. Carson opened an investigation into the incident, but it went nowhere when the officer later died of a wound he received in a duel. The incident, along with another fight between California volunteers and a band of Apache near Alamogordo, caused the remaining chiefs to surrender to Carson, flee to Mexico, or join other tribes to the west. In 1863, Carleton continued with his plan and ordered Carson to enter the Navajo territory and to receive their surrender on July 20th, 1863. When no Navajo showed up, Carson was ordered to persuade or force the Navajo to surrender. Carson enlisted the Utes in his campaign to capture as many Navajo as possible and launched his full-scale scorched earth policy on the Navajo in January 1864. Carson's soldiers destroyed everything in their path, eradicating the way of life for the Navajo people. Those who surrendered were taken to Fort Canby, and those who resisted were killed. Some were able to escape, but were soon forced to surrender due to starvation and the freezing winter temperatures. The Long Walk started at the beginning of spring 1864. Bands of Navajo led by the Army were force-marched 300 to 575 miles, depending on their route, to an area called Bosque Redondo near Fort Sumner. Between 1864 and 1866, 10,000 Navajos and 500 Mescalero Apache were relocated during at least 53 different forced marches. Up to 3,500 people died from starvation and disease between the marches and their internment. While Carson was following orders, he did not hate Native Americans in the true racist sense of many of his mid-19th century contemporaries. He even requested to be allowed to resign his commission and to return to his family in Taos, saying he signed up to fight Texans, not Indians. Carleton denied his request, believing only Carson could complete the task. After the campaign against the Navajo is completed, Carson returns to a hero's welcome in Santa Fe. Carleton heaps praise on Carson for breaking the Navajo and ending hundreds of years of threats to New Mexico settlements. None of this sits well with Carson, and he wants to return to his family in Taos. On March 13, 1865, Carson was appointed Brevet Brigadier General and appointed Commandant of Fort Garland, Colorado. This only lasts for a short time as his declining health retires him from military service. Carson retires to Boguesville, Colorado and takes up ranching. In 1868, he was asked to escort several Ute chiefs to Washington, D.C. for a meeting with President Grant to plead for assistance for their tribe. During the trip, he meets a doctor who confirms that Carson is suffering from an aneurysm previously diagnosed in Colorado. Soon after his return from Washington, Josepha died from complications after she gave birth to their 8th child. Her death was a crushing blow to Carson, and he died a month later at age 58 on May 23, 1868. His last words were, "Goodbye, friends, adios, compadres." Both Carson and Josepha's final resting place is in Taos, New Mexico. Here at the National Scouting Museum, we have 3 items that belong to Kit Carson on display. We have one of his rifles, a knife, and a vest. The rifle is a .54 caliber Lehman rifle. It was converted from a flintlock to a percussion rifle and has a full stock and short mountain-style octagonal barrel. The rifle was made in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The knife is an antler-handled fighting knife designed for personal combat. As for the vest, you'll note that how small it appears. While Carson was not a large man, he wasn't as small as the vest would indicate. Wade Phillips had it altered to fit Chope as a child. Now imagine buying a piece of history and then altering it so your child could wear it while he was playing. Both the rifle and the vest are reported to have been purchased by Wade Phillips from the El Racon trading post across the street from Carson's home in Taos. And the knife came to Fremont's collection through the Masonic Lodge in Santa Fe. Kit Carson's legacy has changed over time. During his lifetime, Carson was a larger-than-life hero who helped open the West and made settlement possible. He is remembered as a symbol of American frontier, brave, resourceful, and rugged. But modern historians also highlight the complex and often tragic consequences of westward expansion, particularly for Native Americans. Carson's role in those events shows how even well-intentioned figures can be part of a larger system that causes harm. In understanding Carson, you also begin to understand our history, its promises, and its tragedies. He was a man shaped by his time, a scout who helped open the frontier, a soldier who followed orders, and a symbol whose legend both inspires and challenges us. We must remember him not as a flawless hero or a pure villain, but as a man whose life reminds us to question and reflect on our history. His story invites us to look deeper into the people and choices that shaped our nation. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of Scouting America through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.